I gave my family everything. My youth, my sweat, my soul. Then, with one vote, they threw me out like yesterday's trash. My name is Leah, and I never thought that at 32, after a decade serving my country in the Marines, I'd find myself cast out and homeless on the coldest night of the year. Every month, for 10 years, I sent a piece of my paycheck home, believing I was weaving a safety net of love and gratitude. I thought when I finally came back, injured and broken, that net would be there to catch me. Instead, my own mother looked at me across the Christmas table and spoke words that left a deeper scar than any piece of shrapnel. "You're a drain on us now. I want you gone." My only hope was a late-night bus to my grandmother's farm, a place that had always been my sanctuary. But as her door creaked open in the dead of night, the words she spoke threatened to destroy the last shred of hope I had left. As I share my journey from heartbreak to healing, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Let me know in the comments, and if stories about the strength of the human spirit resonate with you, please subscribe. Growing up in suburban Ohio, our house was a stage, and my mother, Marlene, was the director, the lead actress, and the sole critic. Love in her world was not a gentle flowing river. It was a currency, hard-earned and easily revoked. It was a transaction, an invisible contract, whose terms were constantly changing. From my earliest memories, I understood that every gift had a price. Every kindness was a down payment on a future obligation. "Here," she'd say, handing me a new pair of sneakers. "Don't you dare come home with anything less than an A on your next report card." Or, after making my favorite dinner, "After all I do for you, the least you can do is have this entire house spotless by the time I get home from my bridge club." There was no room for error, no grace for a child's imperfection. Every action was weighed, measured, and judged. My father was a ghost in this landscape. A faint memory of a tall man with a kind smile who smelled like sawdust and Old Spice. He would read me stories at night, his voice a low, comforting rumble. But those memories were like old photographs, left out in the sun, faded and brittle. He was gone by the time I was 5, and with him went the only sense of unconditional warmth I had ever known. After his departure, Marlene's resentment found a new target in my face. "You have his defiant eyes," she'd spit, the words laced with a decade of bitterness, "and that stubborn chin, always thinking you know better." I learned to look at my own reflection with a sense of inherited guilt. The only place I could breathe, the only place the air didn't feel thick with expectation, was 2 hours away at my grandmother Clara's farm. The farm was a different universe. It was a sprawling canvas of green fields, a creaking old farmhouse that smelled of cinnamon and wood smoke, and a barn filled with the sweet scent of hay. Clara, my mother's mother, was the antithesis of her daughter. Her love was a given, a constant, like the sun rising in the east. Summers spent, there were my salvation. I'd collect eggs from the chickens, the shells still warm in my small hands. I learned to bake apple pies, my fingers clumsy with the dough as she guided me with patient hands. We'd sit on the wide porch swing for hours, shelling peas into a large metal bowl that chimed with each drop, and she would tell me stories. "Leah," she said once, her gaze fixed on the distant tree line, "you have a fire in you, a strong, steady flame. The world will try to douse it with its own cold water. Don't you ever let it." I clung to those words, storing them away like embers to keep me warm through the long, cold winters of my childhood. My younger siblings, Ryan and Sophie, developed their own survival strategies for navigating life with Marlene. Ryan, 2 years my junior, was a chameleon. He possessed an uncanny ability to sense our mother's mood and morph his personality to match it. If she was feeling sentimental, he was the loving, doting son. If she was stressed about money, he was frugal and serious. Sophie, 4 years younger than me, mastered the art of flattery before she could even tie her own shoes. "Mom, that color makes you look like you could be my sister," she'd coo. And Marlene would preen, the compliment purchasing Sophie a week of immunity from criticism. I, however, remained stubbornly myself. I asked too many questions. I challenged the inconsistencies in her rules. I was, as she so often reminded me, the difficult one. By the time I was 18, the house felt like a pressure cooker, and I knew I was about to explode. I needed an escape, a way out that was honorable, a path that might, just might, finally transform my mother's transactional approval into something resembling pride. The United States Marine Corps seemed like the answer. It was structure, purpose, a cause greater than myself. When I sat Marlene down at the kitchen table and told her I had enlisted, I saw something shift in her eyes. It wasn't love. Not yet, but it was the closest thing I had ever seen to respect. "The Marines," she said, a slow smile spreading across her face. "They'll teach you some real discipline." What I didn't understand then was that my enlistment wasn't just a source of pride for her. It was a new financial opportunity. In the weeks before I left for Paris Island, she began weaving a narrative of her own heroic sacrifice. "It's been so tight since your father left," she'd sigh, leaving bills artfully spread across the counter. "This old house, the roof is about to go. I don't know how I managed to keep it all together for you kids." The implication was clear. Before I had even sworn my oath, I made my first promise. I sat in the recruiter's office, listening to the breakdown of my salary, and in my mind, I was already allocating a portion to her. It was the right thing to do. It was what a good daughter would do. Family, after all, helps family. That was the invisible contract I had been trained my whole life to honor. Basic training was the most brutal and clarifying experience of my life. For the first time, the rules were simple and absolute. There were no shifting goalposts, no hidden clauses. You worked harder than you thought possible, you followed orders without question, you had your team's back, and you succeeded. The arbitrary chaos of my mother's approval was replaced by the straightforward, merit-based expectations of my drill sergeants. And I thrived. I graduated at the top of my platoon, my body lean and hard, my mind sharp and focused. I felt a sense of belonging I had never known. During my first deployment to Afghanistan, I set up an automatic transfer. $500 a month, wired directly to my mother's bank account. It was a significant portion of my pay, but my expenses on base were minimal. On our rare, crackling satellite phone calls, Marlene sounded genuinely happy, her voice bright with a pride I had longed to hear my entire life. "I tell everyone at church," she'd say, her voice loud enough for anyone nearby to hear. "That's my daughter, the Marine, keeping us all safe." Those words became my mantra, my shield against fear and loneliness. They echoed in my head during long nights on watch, under a canopy of stars so brilliant they seemed unreal. My mother was proud of me. Finally, I had done something right. I was earning her love. As the years passed, and my rank increased, so did her financial requests. The $500 a month was no longer enough. The leaking roof I had funded in my first year somehow needed replacing again. Then Sophie, accepted into a private college, needed a car to get to her classes. My mother insisted it was a matter of safety. "I can't have her taking the bus at night," she'd say, her voice laced with manufactured worry. "You wouldn't want anything to happen to your little sister, would you?" So I increased the amount, picking up extra duties, volunteering for patrols that came with hazard pay. Then Ryan, after losing yet another job, moved back home, and my contribution had to cover his expenses too. The invisible contract was being amended, the price of admission to my own family constantly rising. The few times I managed to get leave, the warmth I heard on the phone never quite materialized in person. I'd arrive home, exhausted and jet-lagged, to a list of home repairs waiting for me. "Since you're here, the gutters need cleaning." Or, "That fence in the backyard has a loose post." My brief stays were filled with chores and social obligations she had arranged, showing me off to her friends like a trophy she had won. Yet, in between the demands, there were crumbs of affection. A birthday cake with the strawberry frosting I loved. A scrapbook she'd started with a few newspaper clippings about military operations that might have involved my unit. A quick, almost accidental hug as I headed back to the airport. I clung to those moments like a starving person clings to a crust of bread. They were my proof that beneath the hard, demanding exterior, my mother did love me. I just needed to try harder, give more, be better. My grandmother Clara was the only one who saw through the charade. During my precious, all too brief visits to the farm, she would gently try to pry open my eyes. We'd walk through her apple orchard, the air sweet with the scent of blossoms or ripe fruit, and she would try to make me see. "Leah, love is not a debt to be repaid," she would say, her hand resting gently on my arm. "You cannot buy someone's affection, and even if you could, a love that's for sale isn't worth having." But I was too deep in the transaction, too invested in the belief that my sacrifices would eventually pay off. The pattern was set. I would serve. I would send money. And one day, the contract would be fulfilled. One day, I would come home to the loving, welcoming family I had built in my dreams. The family my contributions had surely purchased. That dream was my shield, my purpose. It kept me going through 10 years of service, through 3 brutal deployments, through the soul-crushing grief of watching friends fall in combat. Through it all, I held on to the unwavering belief that I was not just serving my country, but finally, painstakingly, securing my place in my family's heart. I had never been more wrong. My final deployment was to a volatile region in the Horn of Africa. The official mission was peacekeeping, but everyone on the ground knew that peace was a fragile theoretical concept there. Our unit was tasked with providing security for a humanitarian aid convoy, delivering food and medical supplies to a remote village that had been ravaged by years of sectarian conflict. On paper, it was a low-risk operation, but my gut, honed by a decade of experience, told me otherwise. The air was different, heavy, watchful. The day it happened, the sun was a merciless, white-hot disk in a bleached blue sky. We were escorting the final trucks into the village square. I remember the details with a hallucinatory clarity. The faces of the children, their eyes wide and ancient, the smell of dust and cooking fires, the sound of the wind whistling through the cracked mud walls of the buildings. I was walking point with Corporal Martinez, a good kid from El Paso, all of 20 years old and on his first deployment. He was nervous, his knuckles white on his rifle. Just keep your eyes open, Martinez, I told him, trying to project a calm I didn't feel. These are just families trying to get by. The explosion was not a sound. It was a physical force that ripped the world apart. It was a wave of pure, violent energy that lifted me off my feet and threw me through the air like a rag doll. There was a blinding flash of white light, an all-consuming roar that swallowed every other sound, and then a profound, terrifying silence as I tumbled through a sky filled with dust and debris. When I landed, the impact jolted through my body, but I felt no pain. I only felt a strange, disconnected numbness. I tried to push myself up, but my right leg wouldn't respond. I looked down and saw a mangled ruin of flesh and bone. The screaming started then, a thin, distant sound that I vaguely recognized as my own. I learned later, in the sterile, antiseptic-smelling field hospital in Germany, that Martinez had been killed instantly. 3 other members of my unit were seriously injured. An RPG, fired from a hidden position in the hills, had struck the vehicle directly behind me. The shrapnel had torn through my right leg and lower back, shattering my femur and shredding the nerves into a useless tangle. The first thing the doctor told me when I woke from the first of many surgeries was, "You're lucky to be alive, Marine." The second thing he said was, "Your military career is over." Those 2 sentences dismantled my entire identity. The next 3 months became a surreal, pain-filled blur. There were endless surgeries to remove shrapnel and reconstruct my leg with plates and screws. There was the constant grinding pain that even the most potent medications could only dull to a manageable roar. And there was the grueling physical therapy, the agonizing process of learning to walk again, my body screaming in protest with every single step, supported by the cold, unforgiving metal of a cane and a heavy leg brace. But the physical agony was a distant echo compared to the psychological trauma. The guilt over Martinez's death was a heavy cloak I couldn't take off. The abrupt end to my career, the only life I had known for my entire adult life, left a gaping void. I was facing a future that was a complete blank, a terrifying, unstructured emptiness. During those dark months of recovery, a strange thing happened. My mother began to call, not just once a week, but nearly every day. Her voice, which had always been sharp and critical, was now soft and syrupy sweet, a nurturing tone I barely recognized. "We're getting your old room ready for you, sweetheart," she said in one call. "Tyler moved out again, so you'll have the whole space to yourself. We'll make it so comfortable for you." In another call she mentioned, "The church group is organizing a meal train for when you get home. Everyone wants to help our wounded warrior." The sudden attention was disorienting, but after years of emotional starvation, I drank it in like water in a desert. This, I thought, must be the silver lining. My injury, my sacrifice, had finally broken through her hard exterior. It had finally proven that I was worthy of her care, of her love. Lying in my sterile hospital bed, thousands of miles from home, I began to construct a new dream. I envisioned a homecoming filled with the unconditional love I had always craved. I daydreamed about family dinners, where I was the guest of honor, where my stories were listened to with rapt attention. I pictured my mother, her face soft with concern, tenderly helping me with my physical therapy exercises. I imagined, finally, being a real part of a family that functioned on love, not obligation. The contract, I believed, had finally been paid in full with my own blood and bone. As my medical discharge date approached, I made my plans. I would be home just before Christmas. "Oh, that's perfect," my mother chirped when I called to confirm the dates. "The whole family will be together for the holidays. It will be a real celebration." The journey home was an ordeal. The military arranged medical transport to Pittsburgh International Airport, but from there, I was on my own. Navigating the chaotic holiday terminals was a special kind of hell. Every step with my cane sent shooting pains up my leg. People jostled past me, their faces impatient, oblivious to the invisible war. One was fighting just to stay upright. But I pushed through, my body fueled by painkillers, and my spirit fueled by the anticipation of the welcome that awaited me. As the plane began its descent, I peered out the window at the snow-dusted landscape below. After a decade of desert heat and foreign bases, the sight of a Pennsylvania winter filled me with a profound sense of belonging. I was coming home. The first crack in my carefully constructed fantasy appeared when I turned on my phone after landing. The screen was blank, no messages asking about my flight, no missed calls checking if I had landed safely. I swallowed the lump of disappointment in my throat and called my mother. "I've landed," I said, trying to keep my voice bright. "Oh, that's today," she replied, her voice distracted and flat. The syrupy sweetness from our hospital calls was gone. "Well, we're all terribly busy with Christmas preparations. Can you just get a cab?" The $80 cab ride was a stark reminder of my new, uncertain financial reality. As the taxi pulled up to the 2-story house I grew up in, I saw it was extravagantly decorated. Light-up reindeer on the lawn, an inflatable Santa on the roof, and multicolored lights outlining every window. It was a perfect performance for the neighbors. I paid the driver and began the awkward, painful process of maneuvering my duffel bag out of the trunk while balancing on my cane. I made my slow, agonizing way up the icy walkway. No one came out to help. By the time I reached the front door, sweat was soaking through my shirt despite the biting December chill, and the pain in my leg had escalated to a screaming inferno. I raised my hand to knock, but hesitated. This was my home. Before I could decide, the door swung open, and my mother stood there, her face a mask of annoyance. "Were you just going to stand there all day?" she snapped. "You're letting all the heat out." And just like that, with those 9 cold words, I knew. Nothing had changed, or rather, something had changed. It had gotten worse. The house smelled of pine needles and cinnamon, a scent that had always meant Christmas, safety, and a fleeting sense of joy. Now, it just felt like a hollow stage set. A massive, perfectly decorated tree dominated the living room, its branches heavy, with my mother's collection of expensive, curated ornaments. It was a tree designed for a magazine, not a family. "You can put your things in your old room," Marlene said, already turning her back to me and heading towards the kitchen. "We converted it to a home office for Tyler, but he set up an air mattress for you in the corner." I stood in the entryway, leaning heavily on my cane, my duffel bag a dead weight at my feet. The nurturing voice I had clung to in the hospital felt like a distant, cruel hallucination. Before I could formulate a response, my sister Sophie emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a festive apron. "Leah, you made it." Her enthusiasm seemed genuine as she approached for a hug, but then she stopped, her eyes flicking down to my cane embrace. "Can I hug you? I don't want to hurt you." "A hug would be nice," I said, my voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. I realized with a jolt how long it had been since I'd had any form of gentle, physical human contact. The embrace was brief, a small, warm island in the increasingly icy atmosphere of my homecoming. "Sophie, the pie needs checking." My mother called sharply from the kitchen. Sophie gave me an apologetic smile and scurried away, leaving me alone again in the entryway. With a deep, steadying breath, I began the painful journey up the stairs to what was once my bedroom. My mother's words had been an understatement. The room was gone. The pale blue paint I had chosen as a teenager was covered with a sterile beige. My old desk, my bookshelf, the posters on my walls, all had been erased, replaced by a sleek, modern desk, a hulking computer, and industrial-looking filing cabinets. There was no evidence that I had ever lived there, no marks on the doorframe tracking my childhood growth, no faded spot on the wall where a picture once hung. An air mattress, looking sad and deflated, had been tossed in the corner with a thin blanket and a pillow that looked as flat as a pancake. I set my bag down and carefully lowered myself onto the air mattress, which sank almost to the floor under my weight, the cold of the wood seeping through. I laid there for a long moment, staring at the ceiling, the physical pain in my leg a dull counterpoint to the sharp, stabbing pain in my heart. 10 years of service. Over $60,000 sent home. A leg shattered in service to my country. And this was my welcome. This was my reward. I allowed myself exactly 1 minute of self-pity. 1 minute to let the full weight of my disappointment wash over me. Then, using my cane, I pushed myself back up. First was a Marine. I had survived worse than this. Maybe they just needed time to adjust. Maybe the warmth would come. By evening, the house was filled with the loud, boisterous energy of my extended family. My Aunt Susan and her husband Frank, my cousins Jennifer and Peter with their spouses, and finally, my brother Tyler, who arrived last with a bottle of expensive wine and a cursory nod in my direction that barely qualified as an acknowledgement of my existence. The air buzzed with chatter about jobs, promotions, and winter vacations to tropical destinations. I found a quiet chair in the corner of the living room, trying to make myself as small as possible. The constant, grinding pain in my leg made it difficult to follow the rapid-fire conversations, and the noise of the party was a jarring contrast to the quiet solitude of my recovery. People's eyes would occasionally flicker my way, a brief glance filled with a mixture of morbid curiosity and clear discomfort, before quickly looking away. It was as if my cane and my limp were a breach of holiday etiquette, an unpleasant reminder of a world that had no place amidst the festive decorations and forced cheer. My Aunt Susan was the first to brave an actual conversation. She approached, a half-empty glass of wine in her hand. "So," she began, gesturing vaguely toward my leg with her glass. "You got hurt over there, huh?" "Yes," I said, grateful for the direct question despite her awkwardness. "An RPG explosion, shrapnel damage, and a significant nerve injury." "Wow. Well, at least you're home now," she said brightly, as if that solved everything. "And the military takes good care of its own, right? I'm sure they set you up with some great benefits." Before I could even begin to explain the labyrinthine bureaucracy of the VA and the battles that often accompanied securing those benefits, my mother's voice rang out, calling everyone to the dining room. The table was a masterpiece of holiday perfection. The fine china that was only ever used on Christmas and Easter, the crystal glasses that had belonged to my grandmother, an elaborate centerpiece of poinsettias and glittering gold ornaments. The food was arranged with the same artistic precision. My mother didn't just cook a meal, She curated an experience. "Leah, you can sit at the end there, next to the wall," she instructed, pointing to a single chair that had been awkwardly wedged into a space at the corner of the table. "That way, your equipment won't be in anyone's way." By equipment, she meant my cane. I made my way to the assigned seat, acutely aware of every eye following my labored movements. The chair was pushed so close to the wall that I had to sit sideways, my injured leg extended awkwardly into the little space that remained, my hip already screaming in protest. The dinner began with a prayer led by my Uncle Frank, thanking God for family, health, and prosperity. No mention was made of service, of sacrifice, or of those who could not be home for the holidays. As the platters of food were passed around, the table conversations resumed, a competitive symphony of achievements. "Jennifer just made senior manager," Aunt Susan announced proudly, beaming at her daughter. "Youngest one in her company's history. And Peter closed that big real estate deal he was telling us about at Thanksgiving," Uncle Frank added, clapping his son on the back. "The commission was enough for a down payment on a boat." My mother glowed, looking at my cousins with an admiration she had never shown me. "I always knew you two would do well for yourselves. You've got the family ambition." The implication hung in the air, as thick and heavy as the scent of roasting turkey. Unlike me, who had squandered a decade of my life in the military only to come home broken and empty-handed. I swallowed my hurt along with a bite of dry turkey and tried to join the conversation. "The unit I served with," I began, my voice feeling rusty from disuse. "We did some amazing work rebuilding schools in—" "Leah, could you pass the gravy?" My brother Tyler interrupted, his eyes fixed on the gravy boat just beyond my reach, not even bothering to look at me. This became the pattern for the entire meal. Each time I tried to speak, to share an experience, to simply exist as part of the family, someone would talk over me, change the subject, or ask for a dish to be passed, effectively erasing my voice from the conversation. My mother, the conductor of this orchestra of exclusion, masterfully directed the attention away from me, with a pointed question to a cousin, or a compliment about the food. I was being systematically silenced, rendered invisible at my own welcome home dinner. The breaking point came, as it so often did in our family, over something small and breakable. My mother brought out her special Christmas dessert, a rich dark pudding served on antique dessert plates that had belonged to her grandmother, Clara. As she handed me my portion, her expression was a mixture of magnanimity and warning. It was clear she expected me to recognize the great honor she was bestowing upon me by allowing me to use a precious family heirloom. I accepted the plate with a murmured, "Thank you," balancing it carefully on my lap. But as I shifted in my painfully uncomfortable chair, trying to find a position that didn't send daggers of fire through my hip and back, my injured leg seized with a violent, electrifying spasm. My entire body jerked. The plate slipped from my fingers, seeming to hang in the air for a horrifying slow-motion second before it crashed to the hardwood floor and shattered into 100 tiny pieces. The silence that followed was absolute, a deafening void where the cheerful holiday chatter had been. Every eye was on me. "I'm so sorry," I began, my voice a small, mortified whisper. I was already reaching for my cane, planning to somehow get down on the floor and clean up the mess. My mother's face had transformed into a mask of cold, white-hot fury. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" Her voice was quiet, but it vibrated with a rage that was far more terrifying than any shout. "That plate survived 2 world wars, the Great Depression, and your clumsy cousins as children. And you couldn't manage to hold on to it for 5 minutes. It was an accident," I said, my voice barely audible. "My leg." "Your leg. Your pain. Your service?" She spat the words like they were poison, her voice rising with each syllable. "That's all we've heard about for months. Do you think you're the only person in the world with problems? While you were off playing soldier, I was here, dealing with real life, real bills, real responsibilities." I stared at her, the shock rendering me speechless. "Playing soldier? Mom, I nearly died. I was wounded, and I sent you thousands upon thousands of dollars over the years. Money," she laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Money that barely covered what it costs to maintain this house, to keep up appearances in this neighborhood, so your siblings wouldn't be ashamed of where they came from. And now you come back, broken and useless, expecting us to wait on you hand and foot, to rearrange our entire lives around your disability." The room was frozen. My family sat like statues, their faces a mixture of discomfort and morbid fascination. "I never expected that," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady, to hold on to the last shreds of my dignity. I thought I was coming home." "Thought what?" she sneered, standing now, looming over me where I sat trapped in my corner. "That we'd be your personal nurses. That we'd convert this house into a hospital ward for you? Look at you. You can't even hold a plate. You're a burden, Leah. A burden I never asked for, and certainly don't deserve." The words struck me with the force of a physical blow. I had spent 10 years, a third of my life, convincing myself that my sacrifices were building a foundation of love and respect. In one single brutal moment, she had taken a sledgehammer to that foundation, and it all crumbled into dust. I pushed myself up, my hands shaking as I gripped my cane. "If that's how you feel," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth, "then I'll go. That's the best idea you've had since you got here," my mother replied coldly, turning her back on me. "Get out of this house. Go find somewhere your brokenness won't ruin everyone else's holiday." No one spoke up for me. Not Tyler, who I had helped support for years. Not Sophie, for whom I had bought a car. Not my aunt, not my uncle, not my cousins. They sat in their heavy, complicit silence, their eyes averted, suddenly fascinated by the patterns on their own dessert plates. I gathered what little dignity I had left along with my cane and limped toward the stairs to collect my few belongings. As I began the painful climb, I heard the conversation slowly, awkwardly resume behind me, as if a brief, unpleasant interruption had been dealt with, and now the celebration could continue. By the time I came back downstairs with my duffel bag slung over my shoulder, the broken plate had been swept away. A fresh dessert had been served to someone else. No one looked up as I let myself out the front door and into the cold, unforgiving Christmas night. The winter air hit my face like a slap, shocking me out of the numb disbelief that had carried me out of the house. Reality crashed in with the force of a tidal wave as I stood on the front porch, my duffel bag at my feet, my cane clutched in my trembling hand. It was past 9 o'clock at night on Christmas Day. I was injured, alone, in pain, and I had absolutely nowhere to go. For a fleeting, desperate moment, I considered knocking on the door. I could apologize, beg for forgiveness, swallow my pride along with the crushing injustice of it all. But even as the thought formed, I heard a fresh burst of laughter from inside the house. The celebration was continuing without me. The message was brutally clear. I was not wanted. I was not missed. I was not a part of their story anymore. With a slowness born of pain and heartbreak, I made my way down the icy walkway to the street. The nearest hotel was miles away, an impossible journey on foot in my condition. I pulled out my phone, my fingers numb with cold, and checked my bank balance before attempting to call a cab. The numbers on the screen made my stomach clench into a tight, sick knot. After paying for the cab from the airport, and with my final paycheck and medical discharge pay still processing through military bureaucracy, I had less than $200 to my name. Not enough for a hotel for more than a night or two, and certainly not enough to build any kind of new life on. As I stood there under the harsh glare of a streetlight, a car slowed in front of the house. The window rolled down, revealing an elderly man with a kind, wrinkled face peering out at me with concern. "You all right there, miss? Look like you could use some help with that bag." Under normal circumstances, my Marine training would have kicked in. I would have politely declined, wary of strangers, fiercely self-reliant. But these were not normal circumstances. I was at the absolute end of my rope. "Actually," I said, my voice catching in my throat, "I could use a ride to the bus station, if it's not too much trouble." The man, who introduced himself as George, insisted it was no trouble at all. "My wife, Martha, passed last year," he explained as he carefully loaded my bag into his trunk, his movements gentle and respectful. "Driving around on Christmas night, looking at the lights, it keeps me from sitting alone with the memories. It's good to have some company." As we drove through the brightly decorated neighborhoods, a stark contrast to the darkness I felt inside, George shared stories about his 50-year marriage to Martha. He asked gentle questions about my service, and unlike my family, he actually listened to the answers. He didn't interrupt. He didn't change the subject. He expressed genuine gratitude for my sacrifice, his eyes meeting mine in the rearview mirror with a respect I hadn't seen since I'd left my unit. By the time we reached the cold, nearly deserted bus station, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt since landing on American soil: humanity. "Where are you headed from here?" George asked as he helped me out of the car. I hesitated, the plan forming even as I spoke the words. "My grandmother's farm. It's about 2 hours from here." It was my only hope, my last resort. "Well, I hope your welcome there is a damn sight warmer than whatever sent you out on a night like this," he said, the genuine concern in his eyes making me want to weep. He refused my offer of money for the ride. Instead, he pressed a crisp $20 bill into my hand. "For the bus ticket, soldier," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Merry Christmas." I watched him drive away, a painful knot in my throat. A complete stranger had shown me more kindness and compassion in 20 minutes than my own family had in my entire homecoming. Inside the station, I discovered that the last bus heading in the general direction of my grandmother's farm would be leaving in 15 minutes. It wouldn't take me all the way there, only to a small town called Mill Creek, about 5 miles from her property, but it was the best option I had. I purchased the ticket using George's $20 and some of my own dwindling funds. The bus was nearly empty, a traveling sanctuary for a handful of other souls, with their own stories of why they were journeying on Christmas night. I found a seat near the back where I could stretch my injured leg into the aisle, and settled in for the ride, my cane propped beside me like a silent, loyal companion. As the bus pulled away from the station, the city lights giving way to the dark highway, The events of the day replayed in my mind in a cruel, endless loop. The coldness of my reception, the converted bedroom, the uncomfortable dinner, the shattered plate. My mother's words, "You're a burden." After everything I had given, everything I had sacrificed, this was what waited for me at home. The contrast with my military experience couldn't have been more stark. In the Marines, I had found the family I had always craved. My unit members had become my brothers and sisters, people who would literally take a bullet for each other. We shared everything: food, stories, fears, dreams. When one of us succeeded, we all celebrated. When one of us struggled, we all circled the wagons and provided support. I thought about Martinez, so young and full of life, now buried in Arlington. I thought about my captain, who had visited me every single day in the hospital in Germany until her own unit was redeployed. I thought about a fellow Marine who had lost both legs in a previous explosion, and had video called me from his prosthetics fitting just to show me that life went on, that we could still be strong. They were my real family, and now I was separated from them by distance and circumstance, cast out by the biological family that had never truly wanted me. The landscape outside the window transformed as we left the suburbs behind, giving way to the rolling, snow-covered farmlands of western Pennsylvania. Even in the darkness, illuminated only by the occasional passing car or distant farmhouse light, I recognized this terrain. It was the landscape of my happiest childhood memories, all centered around visits to my grandmother's farm. I realized with a jolt of anxiety that I hadn't called ahead to tell her I was coming. It was now past 10:30, likely well after she, an early riser, would have gone to bed. I pulled out my phone, but the battery was nearly dead. I had left my charger plugged in beside the air mattress in my hurry to leave. I managed to dial her number just before the screen went black, but the call went straight to her voicemail. What if she wasn't home? What if she was traveling for the holidays? What if, like my mother, she saw me as nothing but a burden? No, I couldn't believe that. Clara had always been my safe harbor, the one person whose love was a constant. She would welcome me. She had to. The bus arrived at the small, one-room station in Mill Creek just before midnight. As the driver announced the location, I gathered my belongings and made my slow way to the front. "Merry Christmas," the driver said as I carefully navigated the steps down to the frosty sidewalk. "You got someone meeting you?" "No," I admitted. "I need to get to a farm about 5 miles north of here." He frowned, his brow furrowed with concern. "Not much in the way of taxis in this town, especially this time of night. And in your condition." He trailed off, but I knew what he meant. 5 miles might as well have been 50 given my injury, the freezing temperature, and the hour. "Wait here," the driver said, and before I could protest, he walked across the quiet street to a small convenience store, the only business still open this late on Christmas. He returned a few minutes later with an older man in tow, wiping his hands on a worn apron. "This is Harold," the driver explained. "Owns the store. He says he's heading that direction after he closes up in about 15 minutes. He can give you a ride if you're willing to wait." Relief, so potent it almost brought me to my knees, flooded through me. "Thank you," I said to both men, my voice thick with unshed tears. "I can wait." Harold proved to be another unexpected angel on this strangest of Christmas nights. After closing his store, he helped me into his old pickup truck and listened attentively as I gave directions to my grandmother's farm. Like George, he asked about my service with genuine interest, sharing that his own son was currently deployed with the Navy. "Must be hard coming home to a country that doesn't understand what you've all been through," he observed as we turned onto the dark, rural route that would lead to my grandmother's property. "Harder coming home to a family that doesn't want to understand," I replied, the words slipping out before I could censor them. Harold just nodded, a world of wisdom in his silence. The truck's headlights finally illuminated the familiar hand-painted sign at the entrance to my grandmother's long driveway, Clara's Orchard and Farm. Below it, a smaller sign that had been there since my childhood, "All are welcome here." I prayed that still included me. The farmhouse stood silhouetted against the night sky, a 2-story structure that had weathered nearly a century of seasons. A single, warm light glowed from the kitchen window, a beacon of hope that propelled me forward despite my exhaustion and pain. "Want me to wait until you're safely inside?" Harold asked as he helped me out of the truck. "No thank you. You've done more than enough," I assured him, though a cold knot of uncertainty was churning in my stomach. "My grandmother and I are very close. She'll be glad to see me." With a final wave, Harold drove away, his red taillights disappearing down the dark country road. I stood alone at the end of the walkway, gathering my courage before beginning the slow journey to the front porch. Each crunch of my cane on the gravel path sent a jolt of pain through my damaged nerves, but I pressed on, my eyes fixed on that single light in the window. The 3 steps up to the porch might as well have been a mountain. By the time I reached the front door, my shirt was soaked with sweat despite the freezing air, and my breathing came in short, pained gasps. I leaned heavily against the doorframe, trying to compose myself before knocking. What would I say? How could I possibly explain showing up unannounced, near midnight on Christmas, broken and cast out? The truth seemed too raw, too painful to articulate, even to the one person who had always accepted me without question. Before I could decide, my hand rose almost of its own accord and knocked on the weathered wooden door. The sound seemed impossibly loud in the quiet country night. Long, agonizing moments passed. I knocked again, louder this time. Fear, cold and sharp, began to rise in my throat. What if the light I had seen was just one she'd left on by accident? What if the house was empty? What if this final hope proved as hollow as all the others? Then, I heard movement inside. The scrape of a chair, the soft shuffle of footsteps approaching. The porch light flickered on, momentarily blinding me. When my vision cleared, the door had opened, and my grandmother was standing there. Clara looked older than I remembered. Her once auburn hair was now completely silver, pulled back in a loose bun. New lines were etched around her eyes and mouth, testament to the years I had been away. She wore a faded blue robe over flannel pajamas, her reading glasses perched on her nose. Her expression as she took in my appearance, the cane, the duffel bag, the obvious pain and distress on my face, shifted from surprise to something I couldn't read. It was a hard, closed-off look. "Grandma," I began, my voice breaking on the single word. "I'm so sorry to show up like this." She held up a hand, a sharp gesture that cut off my words. Her face, usually so full of warmth, was a mask of stone. When she finally spoke, her voice was cold and distant, a voice I had never heard from her in my entire life. "Your mother called," she said. "Go away." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. I staggered back, my hand flying to my mouth, a choked sob escaping. I nearly lost my balance. The last fragments of my heart, the ones I had been desperately trying to hold together, shattered into dust. The one person I had counted on, the one relationship I had believed was genuine and unconditional, had just rejected me as cruelly and completely as my mother had. I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't process this final, soul-crushing betrayal. Tears streamed down my face as I stood swaying on her porch, utterly, completely broken. And then, in an instant that stretched into an eternity, everything changed. Clara's hard expression melted away, replaced by a look of horrified alarm and then a fierce, all-encompassing love. She lunged forward, her arms surprisingly strong, catching me just as my legs were about to give out. "Leah! Oh my God, my sweet girl, I'm so sorry," she cried, her voice thick with anguish as she pulled me into a desperate, bone-crushing embrace. "It was a test. I had to see your face. I had to be sure," she said urgently, her words tumbling over each other as she held me tight. "Your mother called hours ago with some vicious, ridiculous story about you having a mental breakdown, becoming violent, stealing from her. I knew in my heart it was a pack of lies, but I needed to see for myself. I needed to see the hurt in your eyes when I said her words back to you to know the truth of what she'd done." The relief was so sudden, so overwhelming that my legs gave way entirely. Clara, a rock against my collapsing weight, supported me as she helped me stumble inside, kicking the door closed behind us against the cold night. "What did she do to you?" she demanded, her voice shaking with a fury I had never witnessed before, as she lowered me onto the worn, comfortable sofa in her living room. "Tell me everything." And I did. Through a torrent of tears and a haze of exhaustion and pain, I recounted the entire nightmarish day. The cold welcome, the converted bedroom, the disastrous dinner, the shattered plate, and finally, my mother's cruel, final dismissal. Clara listened without interrupting, her hand gripping mine, her expression growing increasingly thunderous. "That woman," she said when I had finally finished, her voice a low, shaking growl. "My own daughter. I have never been so ashamed in all my life." She disappeared briefly into the kitchen, returning with a glass of water and 2 pills. "For the pain," she explained, correctly reading the tension and agony etched into my body. "Then we'll get you settled in a proper bed. Everything else can wait until morning." As I swallowed the medication, the bitterness of the pills, a welcome distraction, Clara sat beside me on the sofa, taking both of my hands in her warm, calloused ones. "Leah, listen to me," she said, her eyes boring into mine, willing me to believe her. "You are not a burden. You are a hero, not just for your military service, but for your kindness, your generosity, and your strength. This is your home. For as long as you want it, for as long as you need it to be. There are no conditions here. There is no price tag." She said no one wanted me, I whispered, the pain of my mother's words still a fresh, gaping wound. "She was wrong," Clara said firmly, her grip tightening on my hands. "I want you here. I have missed you every single day, for 10 long years. Having you home, even under these terrible circumstances, is the best Christmas gift I could ever receive." She helped me to my feet, and led me to the guest room at the end of the hall, a room I realized had been kept ready for me all this time. Unlike the cold, impersonal office with its sad air mattress at my mother's house, this room held evidence of belonging. There were photographs of me in my uniform, smiling with my unit, displayed proudly on the antique wooden dresser. A beautiful handmade quilt in my favorite colors of blue and green was folded neatly on the bed. There were even a few of the books I had loved as a teenager still sitting on the bookshelf. "You kept all this for me?" I asked, my voice choked with emotion, overwhelmed by this tangible proof of love. "Of course I did," Clara replied simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "This has always been your home too." As she helped me into the comfortable bed, carefully arranging pillows to support my injured leg, she began to hum the same soft lullaby she had sung to me when I was a child, a melody that felt like safety and peace. The familiar tune, combined with the blessed relief of the pain medication and the bone-deep emotional exhaustion, began to pull me down into a welcome darkness. Just before consciousness faded completely, I felt her gentle, wrinkled hand brush the hair from my forehead. "Rest now, my brave girl," she whispered, her voice a soothing balm on my shattered spirit. "You're safe. You're home." And for the first time since returning to American soil, for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I truly was. The first rays of a cold winter sunlight filtering through the floral curtains woke me the next morning. For a disorienting moment, I couldn't remember where I was. The comfortable bed, the warm weight of the quilt, the distant, familiar smell of freshly baked bread and brewing coffee. It all seemed like elements of a dream after the waking nightmare of the previous day. Then the pain in my leg reasserted itself, a harsh, grinding reminder of my new reality. I was at my grandmother's farm. I had been rejected by my mother and my siblings. I was injured, unemployed, and essentially homeless, except for the sanctuary Clara had offered me. A soft knock at the door preceded my grandmother's entrance. She carried a tray laden with a plate of scrambled eggs, toast, and a steaming mug of coffee. "How are you feeling this morning?" she asked, her eyes full of a concern that was both gentle and fierce as she set the tray on the bedside table. "Physically or emotionally?" I attempted a smile that probably looked more like a grimace. "Both, I expect, are pretty rough," she said, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed. "But we're going to work on healing both. One day at a time. That's how everything on a farm gets done." Over breakfast, and for many breakfasts after that, Clara encouraged me to talk. She created a space where I could finally unpack the heavy baggage I had been carrying for years. I told her not just about the horror of Christmas dinner, but about my years in the military. Unlike my family, who had shown a complete lack of interest in my experiences, she listened intently. She asked thoughtful questions about the places I had been, the people I had served with, the work we had done. She expressed appropriate outrage at the dangers I had faced, and a profound, unwavering pride in the service I had provided. "You know," she said one afternoon as she was collecting the breakfast dishes, her expression thoughtful, "your mother has always been profoundly self-centered, even as a little girl. Everything was always about her. I tried to teach her empathy, to see the world from outside her own bubble. But some people are simply incapable of seeing beyond their own needs and wants." Clara's eyes, the same blue as my own, filled with a deep, aching compassion. "Oh, my sweet girl, that was never going to happen. And it's not because you weren't worthy of that love. It's because she isn't capable of giving it. You were trying to draw water from a dry well." In the quiet, snow-covered days that followed, Clara helped me begin to process not just the recent, brutal rejection, but the lifetime of conditional love that had shaped my choices and my sense of self-worth. She brought down boxes of the letters and postcards I had sent her from overseas, showing me how she had cherished every word, every photograph, every flimsy scrap of connection during my years away. "I read each one of these at least a dozen times," she told me, her hand resting on a stack of my letters tied together with a faded ribbon. "And I showed them to everyone who would stand still long enough to listen. My church group probably knew more about your deployments than your own unit did." Then came a revelation that initially filled me with a fresh wave of white-hot rage, before giving way to a sad, hollow understanding. Clara, ever practical and quietly observant, had kept careful track of the money I had sent home over the years, growing increasingly concerned about the escalating amounts. "I confronted your mother about it, about 2 years ago," she said, as we sat at her large, worn kitchen table, a spread of her own financial records between us. "I knew what your military salary would be, even with promotions and hazard pay. The amounts you were sending home seemed excessive, unsustainable. I was worried she was taking advantage of you." "What did she say?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "She assured me you were fine," Clara said, her lips tightening into a thin line. "She said you were a decorated officer with plenty left for yourself. She made me feel like I was meddling, like I was questioning your generosity." The truth, as we pieced it together from old bank statements Clara had shrewdly requested from Marlene, under the guise of estate planning, was devastating. Very little of the more than $60,000 I had sent home had gone toward actual household necessities. My mother had used it to fund a lifestyle of luxury purchases, 2 cruises to the Caribbean, a new car for herself, and to maintain her carefully crafted appearance of suburban affluence. The new roof I had funded had never been replaced. The college expenses for Sophie had been almost entirely covered by scholarships and student loans, not my contributions. She was using you, Leah, Clara said plainly, her voice devoid of judgment, only sadness. And I'm partly to blame for not stepping in sooner, for not pushing harder. You couldn't have known the extent of it, I assured her, though the knowledge that my decade of sacrifice had been exploited for cruises and designer handbags added another thick layer to the betrayal. After the first week, Clara insisted on taking me to see her personal physician, Dr. Martin, a kind, elderly man who had known my grandmother for decades. The military docs did a decent job with the initial repairs, he said in his gravelly voice after a thorough examination of my injuries. But your physical therapy plan is outdated, and these powerful pain medications they've got you on are too strong for long-term use. We need a better plan for your recovery. With Dr. Martin's help, we developed a new path forward. He referred me to a physical therapist in town who specialized in nerve injuries from traumatic accidents. He helped me transition to pain management techniques, stretching, meditation, targeted therapies that wouldn't leave me feeling foggy and dependent. The healing was slow, agonizing, and nonlinear. There were days of progress, followed by days of excruciating setbacks. But for the first time, I felt like I had a team, a real support system, dedicated to my well-being. January brought heavy snow to the farm, transforming the landscape into a winter wonderland that was beautiful to look at but made mobility even more challenging. And that's when Clara's community stepped up, in ways that continuously surprised and humbled me. Her friends from the church brought meals 3 times a week, refusing any payment. Her neighbor's 2 teenage sons showed up unasked every time it snowed to shovel wide, clear paths through the snow so I could practice walking with my cane on stable ground. Most surprising was the discovery that Clara had been my biggest advocate for years. People I had never met would greet me by name at the local grocery store or post office, sharing stories Clara had told them about my service and achievements. "You've been bragging about me," I teased her one evening as we sat by the crackling fireplace after another day of visitors and well wishes. "Of course I have," she replied, not a hint of apology in her voice. "I've always been tremendously proud of you, Leah. I just wish you had been able to feel that pride for yourself." As the harsh winter slowly gave way to the first signs of a tentative spring, I began to find a new sense of purpose. I started helping around the farm in ways that accommodated my physical limitations. I couldn't lift heavy equipment or climb ladders to prune the apple trees in the orchard, but I could manage the farm's accounting, update the ancient computer system Clara had been using, and even handle some of the lighter animal care. The physical work, combined with the regular therapy sessions, gradually improved my mobility. The pain remained a constant companion, a dull ache that would sharpen on bad days, but its all-consuming intensity lessened. I learned to manage the worst flare-ups without resorting to the strong medications that dulled both the pain and my mind. But more important than the physical healing was the profound emotional transformation that was taking place. Under Clara's patient, unwavering guidance, I began to recognize the deeply ingrained patterns of approval-seeking that had dominated my entire life. I saw how my desperate, lifelong determination to earn my mother's love had shaped every major decision I had ever made. From joining the military to sending money I couldn't afford to part with, to ignoring the emotional neglect that had been the defining feature of my childhood. "Love that has to be earned isn't really love at all, Leah," Clara told me one sunny afternoon as we planted early spring vegetables in her greenhouse, the warm, earthy smell of the soil a balm to my soul. "It's a transaction. And you, my dear girl, deserve so much better than a life of transactions. You deserve unconditional acceptance." When the snow finally melted and the first green shoots of new life appeared in the orchard, I made a decision that would have been unthinkable to me just a few short months earlier. I would stay at the farm, permanently. The realization came not in a sudden flash of insight, but gradually, emerging from the countless small moments of peace and belonging I had found in the simple, demanding rhythms of farm life. "Are you sure?" Clara asked when I broached the subject, her expression a mixture of hope and caution. "This is a quiet life, very different from what you've known. And you're still so young, with so many possibilities still ahead of you." "I'm sure," I told her, the certainty of it settling deep in my bones. For the first time in my life, I'm making a choice based not on what might earn someone's approval, but on what brings me joy and a sense of peace. The decision made, we began to adapt the farm to accommodate my permanent residence and ongoing recovery. Clara, ever practical, converted a ground-floor study into a beautiful, accessible bedroom for me, eliminating the need to navigate the steep stairs on bad pain days. We installed handrails in strategic locations in the house and barn, and we rearranged her operations to ensure I could participate fully without exacerbating my injuries. In late March, my sister Sophie called. It was the first contact I had had from any family member since Christmas night. "I've been wanting to call," she began, her voice hesitant and full of a guilt that was almost palpable over the phone line. "What happened at Christmas? It was wrong. The way Mom treated you, the things she said. None of us should have stayed silent." "But you did," I replied, not accusingly, but simply stating a fact that needed to be acknowledged. "Yes," she acknowledged, her voice small. We did. I don't have an excuse. Only an explanation. Mom has always controlled the narrative in our family, and we've all just learned to follow her lead. It was always easier than standing up to her. The conversation was difficult, but it was a necessary first step. Sophie didn't ask for forgiveness, which I appreciated. Some wounds were too fresh, too deep for easy reconciliation. But she did ask if we could, in time, begin to rebuild our relationship, sister to sister, separate from our mother's toxic influence. I'd like to try, I told her honestly, but it will have to be slowly. My brother Tyler, in contrast, remained firmly under my mother's sway. His one and only call came in April, and it was focused not on apology, but on money. Mom says you still have access to the old family savings account, he said without preamble, his tone accusatory. She needs you to transfer your disability back pay, as soon as it comes through. The old Leah, the one who was desperate for a crumb of familial approval, might have agreed. She might have seen this as another opportunity to buy her way back into the family, to prove her worth. But the new Leah, strengthened by months of healing and Clara's wisdom, recognized the manipulation for what it was. No, Tyler, I said calmly, the word feeling both powerful and strange on my tongue. That's not going to happen. My disability pay is to support me as I build a new life for myself. After everything Mom has done for you, he demanded, his tone incredulous. What exactly has she done for me, Tyler? I asked, a genuine question. I'm really asking. His silence was the only answer he had. With Clara's encouragement, I took legal and financial steps to protect myself. I consulted with a veterans advocate who helped me navigate the complex system of benefits and ensured that my mother could not access any of my military pension or disability payments. I closed all joint accounts, removed her as a beneficiary on my life insurance policy, and established clear, unbreachable boundaries around financial support. Your resources are for you now, Leah. Clara reminded me when I felt a pang of old, conditioned guilt. You need to secure your own future. No one else is going to do it for you. By the time summer arrived, bringing with it the busy, vibrant season of the farm, I had established a new rhythm for my life. My days were structured around physical therapy exercises, farm tasks adapted to my abilities, and the online courses I had enrolled in using my military education benefits. I was studying agricultural business management, determined to combine my decade of military leadership experience with my newfound love of farming. The transformation wasn't just in my daily activities, but in my entire approach to life. For the first time, I was making choices based on what brought me fulfillment rather than what might earn the approval of others. I was learning to accept help without seeing it as a sign of weakness, to set boundaries without feeling guilty, and most importantly, to recognize my own inherent worth, independent of what I could do or provide for others. You stand taller now, Clara observed one warm evening as we sat on the porch swing, watching the fireflies begin their nightly dance in the fields. Not just physically. I knew what she meant. Despite the permanent limp, despite the cane I would likely need for the rest of my life, I carried myself with a new confidence, a new sense of centeredness. The burden I had shed was not my injury, but the crushing, invisible weight of seeking validation from someone incapable of giving it. I feel taller, I agreed, a genuine smile spreading across my face. Lighter too. Clara smiled back, reaching over to squeeze my hand. That's what happens when you stop carrying other people's expectations and start honoring your own truth. 1 year after that fateful Christmas night, the farm had transformed almost as much as I had. What had once been Clara's quiet retirement project had evolved into a true family business, a partnership between 2 generations. With the help of a grant for veteran-owned businesses, we had made upgrades and expansions that reflected both her lifelong vision and my new contributions. The orchard now featured wider, gravel-packed paths to accommodate my mobility needs, which had the added, unplanned benefit of making it more accessible to elderly visitors from the community and young families with strollers. We had converted one of the old outbuildings into a charming farm store where we sold our apple products, honey from our new beehives, and seasonal vegetables. My physical recovery had reached a plateau, just as Dr. Martin had warned it might. The nerve damage was permanent, leaving me with chronic pain and limited mobility in my right leg. The cane remained a constant companion, and some days were still a difficult, grinding battle that required the use of the wheelchair we kept for emergencies. But I had learned to adapt, to listen to my body, to pace myself, and to accept these limitations without seeing them as failures. They were a part of my story, a reminder of both my trauma and my survival. More important than the physical adaptation was the continued emotional and intellectual growth. Using my military education benefits, I had completed online certificate programs in sustainable agriculture, small business management, and even web design. The farm now had a professional website and a growing social media presence that had expanded our customer base far beyond the local community. I had also found a profound sense of purpose in veteran support work. I started a small, informal program that brought former service members from a nearby VA center to the farm for day visits. Many of them, like me, were struggling with the difficult transition to civilian life, grappling with both visible and invisible wounds. They found a quiet peace in the simple, grounding rhythms of farm work, in the non-judgmental company of the animals, and in the unspoken acceptance of our little community. Clara, now in her late 70s but with more energy than most people half her age, had embraced all these changes with her characteristic enthusiasm. "This farm has never been so alive," she often said, her eyes sparkling as she watched visitors explore the orchards, or a group of veterans quietly mending a fence line. My relationship with Sophie had cautiously improved. She had visited the farm twice, the first time awkward and stilted, but the second time more relaxed. She brought her children, my niece and nephew, who delighted in collecting eggs from the henhouse and feeding the goats we had added to the farm's menagerie. The wounds between us were still there, but we were slowly building a new bridge, one tentative plank at a time. Tyler remained distant, a satellite still firmly in my mother's orbit. I had made peace with that distance, understanding that some relationships could not be forced into health. As for my mother, I had neither seen nor spoken to her since that Christmas night. Through Sophie, I heard occasional, filtered updates. She had remodeled the house again, joined a new, more exclusive social club, and taken a Mediterranean cruise. Her life continued on, seemingly unchanged by my absence, which was perhaps the most telling evidence that cutting all ties had been the right, and only, decision. Or so I thought, until an unseasonably warm day in early December, when a familiar, sleek black sedan pulled into the farm's long gravel driveway. I was in the farm store helping a customer select different apple varieties for a holiday pie when I saw her through the window. Marlene, immaculately dressed as always, she stepped out of her luxury car and surveyed the thriving farm with an expression of thinly veiled disdain. Clara, who had been restocking shelves of jam nearby, followed my gaze. Her body stiffened. "Do you want me to send her away?" she asked quietly, her hand already reaching for the phone. I considered it. A year ago, I would have hidden. I would have let Clara fight my battles, seeking her protection from the emotional storm my mother invariably brought with her. But I was different now. Stronger. "No," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I can handle this." I finished with my customer, wishing them happy holidays, and then made my way outside, my cane making a soft, rhythmic crunch on the gravel. I was conscious of my uneven gait, but for the first time, I was not embarrassed by it. It was simply the way I walked. My mother watched my approach, her eyes flicking to the cane and then quickly away again, as if the physical evidence of my injury was distasteful to her. "Hello, Mom," I said when I reached her, my voice calm and even. "This is a surprise." "Leah," she acknowledged with a curt nod. "You look healthy." "I am. Thank you. What brings you all the way out here?" She glanced around at the farm, at the customers coming and going from the store, at the new sign advertising our holiday wreaths and cider. "I was in the area," she said. It was a clear, bald-faced lie, given that the farm was nowhere near any destination she would normally frequent. I thought I would stop by. I waited, silent, knowing from a lifetime of experience that my mother never just stopped by. There was always a purpose, always an agenda. "Your disability back pay came through," she said finally, getting to the point. "Tyler mentioned you were being unreasonable about sharing it with the family." And there it was. After a full year of no contact, no apology for her cruel words, no acknowledgement of the pain she had caused, she had come for money. In the past, my heart would have leaped at the opportunity. I might have seen this as my chance to buy my way back into her good graces. I might have convinced myself that financial support was the same as love, that I could still fulfill the invisible contract. But now, I saw the transaction for what it was. Emotional extortion, dressed up as family obligation. My disability pay is being used to support my life here at the farm, and to secure my future, I said calmly, my voice unwavering. "I won't be sharing it." Her face hardened, the thin mask of maternal concern dropping away to reveal the familiar, cold fury beneath. "After everything I've done for you? I raised you. I gave you a home. I supported your decision to join the military." "Did you?" I asked, a genuine curiosity in my voice about her version of our shared history. Because I remember sending money home for 10 years to keep that home afloat. I remember calling and writing with barely any response. I remember coming home injured, and being called a burden before being thrown out of your house on Christmas night. "You're being dramatic and exaggerating," she scoffed. "You were emotional and difficult. Your injury had clearly affected your judgment." I felt a familiar tightness in my chest, the old, conditioned pattern of doubt and guilt rising up like a phantom limb. But alongside it came something new, something stronger, a profound sense of clarity. "Mom," I said, and my voice was gentle now, not with weakness, but with the strength of acceptance. "I don't expect you to understand or acknowledge what happened. I've accepted that our relationship will never be what I hoped it would be. But I want you to know that I'm happy here. I've found purpose and peace. And I've learned that I don't need to buy your approval anymore." She stared at me, clearly unprepared for this calm, unyielding resistance. Your grandmother has poisoned you against me, she accused, her eyes darting towards the house. No, I corrected her softly. Grandma has simply loved me unconditionally. She's shown me what real family support looks like. At that moment, as if summoned, Clara emerged from the farm store. She walked slowly toward us, her expression cautious but determined. Marlene, she said, acknowledging her daughter with a nod. If you've come to make amends with Leah, you're welcome to stay for tea. If you've come for any other reason, I think it's best you leave now. My mother looked between the two of us, a flicker of calculation in her eyes. When she realized that neither of us would bend to her will, she straightened her shoulders, pulling her expensive coat tightly around her. I can see I'm wasting my time here, she said coldly. When you come to your senses, Leah, you know where to find me. Without another word, she returned to her car and drove away, gravel spinning under her tires. I watched until the car disappeared down the long driveway, surprised by the profound absence of pain her departure left in its wake. Where once there would have been devastation and a desperate sense of loss, now there was only a quiet, calm relief. Clara placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. Are you okay? Yes, I said, realizing with a sense of wonder that it was the absolute truth. Actually, I'm better than okay. That evening, as we sat on the porch swing, watching the sunset paint the winter sky in brilliant shades of pink and gold, Clara and I reflected on the year's journey. You know, she said thoughtfully, when you showed up on my doorstep last Christmas, I was terrified for you. You were so broken, not just physically, but in your spirit. I acknowledged. I had built my entire identity, my entire sense of self-worth, around earning a love that was never going to be freely given. I don't know who I would be if you hadn't opened that door. And who are you now? She asked, her eyes full of a love that was as constant and reliable as the setting sun. I considered the question, looking out over the fields and the orchard that had become my home, my work, and my purpose. Now, I said slowly, the words feeling true and solid in my chest. Now I understand that family isn't always about blood. It's about the people who stand by you when standing is the hardest thing you can do. It's the people who see your value not in what you can give them, but in who you are. Clara smiled, the fading sunlight illuminating the wisdom in her aged face. That's a lesson many people go their whole lives without learning. I had a good teacher, I told her, reaching over to squeeze her hand. As darkness fell over the farm, bringing with it the promise of another day of purpose and peace, I reflected on how completely my life had changed in just 1 year. The injury that had seemed like the end of everything had become the beginning of a more authentic, more meaningful life. The rejection that had broken my heart had ultimately freed me to find real connections, based on genuine acceptance, rather than desperate obligation. My grandmother had shown me that love should lift you up, not wear you down. That boundaries were not selfish, but necessary for health and self-respect. That starting over wasn't a sign of failure, but sometimes the bravest choice you could possibly make. Most importantly, she had taught me that our worth isn't determined by how others treat us, but by the truth we choose to carry within ourselves. That lesson, hard-won through unimaginable pain and slow, patient healing, was the greatest gift I had ever received. As the first stars began to appear in the clear, cold winter sky, I felt a sense of completion. The journey wasn't over. The healing would likely never be perfect, but I had found my way home, in every sense of the word that mattered.